My name is Ada Kell. I am 67 years old, and I keep a blacksmith's forge at the mouth of the pass, in the town of Ambrose Gap, where the freight road climbs up out of the valley, and every loaded wagon in the country has to stop and breathe its horses before it takes the grade. It isn't much to look at, my shop, a low stone shed gone black with 50 years of forge smoke. A hearth my father raised stone by stone with his own 2 hands. A bellows near as tall as a man. An anvil worn bright and dished in the middle, and by the side door, hung on a length of old trace chain. A row of iron nails where the finished horseshoes wait in their pairs and sizes. And every night of my life that I have been able to stand at that hearth, the last thing I do before I bank the coals and climb the stair is throw the bar off that side door and leave it standing on the latch, and hang a fresh set of shoes on the nail in the dark, on the far side from the road lamp where the light does not reach, and I do not look to see whose hand lifts the latch in the night, and I have never once counted what iron is gone off that nail come morning. That unbarred door and that iron hung in the dark are the beginning and the middle and the end of everything I mean to tell you tonight. So pull your chair up close to the stove, because nothing else will make a lick of sense until you understand why an old woman leaves her forge open every night of her life to a road she cannot see. I was a girl of 9 the winter I learned what a horseshoe is worth, and I do not mean the 6 cents my father would have paid for one, if ever he'd had 6 cents to spare. That was the winter my own family tried to cross this very pass a week too late in the year. My father a charcoal hauler and a roadman, all of us rocking in one wagon, when our near horse threw a shoe on the frozen ruts and split her hoof to the quick and went stone lame, and we had not the coin to have her shod. And my mother was the proudest woman ever born on that road, and she would sooner have laid down in the snow than knock on a lit door with her hand held out. So we sat stranded on the wrong side of the grade in a town full of iron and fire, the way proud road families always have, which is to say alone and freezing. I had a little brother then. His name was Wren, and he was 3, and he had a laugh like a struck triangle, and I want you to hold on to him, because he is the reason for all of it. Now the old smith who kept this very forge before ever I did, a great half-deaf ox of a man named Ballard, had a custom half the pass thought foolish. Every night he threw the bar off his side door and hung the day's spare shoes on a nail in the dark, and never looked to see whose hand came for the iron, and told anybody who asked that he only hung it out to keep the rust off. But that door was left where a proud family could send a child up the black side of the shed at midnight and take the iron they needed and shoe their own horse at his coals and never have to say the word please. I was the one they sent, and I knelt at a stranger's fire at 9 years old and pulled the split shoe and set 2 of Ballard's cold ones and drove the nails the way my father had taught me, while the old man lay on his cot and made a great show of snoring so that I would not be shamed. It got our horse sound. It got us over the grade. But it did not get us over soon enough for Wren. My brother had taken the cold too deep in the long nights we sat stranded, and a rattle got down in his chest, and he died 2 weeks before the first thaw, in a country full of iron and coal and warm forges, for the want of anybody ever knowing that we were freezing. And I have thought every night since that if the taking had only been quieter and sooner, my brother would have grown up to be an old man. So when I was grown, and Ballard was failing, I came back over that pass and bought this forge off him with money saved a dime at a time, and he took my 2 hands in his great scarred ones and made me promise one thing, which was the door. Keep it, he said. Throw the bar off every night, hang the iron where the road lamp don't reach, and never look, and never count. and never let a soul on this pass be made to ask. I have kept that promise 50 years. And I tell you all of this so plain, because there came a winter when the pass closed and the whole town froze the way my own family once froze on the wrong side of it, and one old smith found out at last what 50 years of iron in the dark is really worth, and who it was that had been keeping the account. But the biggest things nearly always start with somebody being cruel on a cold afternoon in front of a crowd that laughs. So I have to tell you about a man. His name is Orrin Tholey, and though he has since earned a little fairness, 3 winters ago he was nothing but a hard, prospering man who had decided that other people's cold was a moral failing he was too clever ever to catch. Thole owned the freight line and the big livery and iron barn down where the road meets the grade, and for 2 years he had wanted my corner, the good lot at the mouth of the pass, where every wagon has to stop and turn, because he meant to tear my father's stone down and put up a freight depot with his name over the door. Twice he offered to buy me out, $500 the last time, and twice I told him no. Because my father raised that hearth stone by stone, and old Ballard hung iron in the dark off that nail for the poor, and there is no figure a man can write on a bank draft that buys a woman off the 2 square rods her whole life is standing on. Tholey took my no the way that kind of man takes it from a woman, smiling with only the bottom half of his face. One of these hard winters is going to close you, Ada, he said. Sentiment don't ring true on an anvil. That autumn was a hard one all over. Banks failing back east and families put out on the roads with everything they owned lashed under a wet tarp. And Ambrose Gap, which had long since forgotten it was ever cold, took to calling those families road trash. One raw afternoon in November, a road family drove their broke-down wagon up to the freight barn, and the man climbed down, hat in his 2 hands, and asked would Tholey stand him a keg of nails against a day's honest work. And Tholey came out onto his loading dock in front of a dozen loafing teamsters and looked that family over the way you look at a spavined horse and said, loud so the whole road would take the lesson, "We do not shoe beggars in this town, for it only teaches them the way back. If a man cannot keep iron under his own wagon, he can drive on and break down where it is somebody else's conscience." And the men on the dock laughed. Not all of them, but enough. And then Tholey's eye fell on me across the road, and he raised his voice and put it on me. "You can quit hanging your charity on that nail, Ottikel," he called, "for all you do is bait the pass with free iron and draw every stray in the territory to my corner." And I stood there in the cold with a coal scuttle in my 2 arms and the whole road looking, and I did not say one single word. I have been ashamed of that silence every day since, and I have come to believe that everything the winter sent afterward was the good Lord and the hard road together, handing one cowardly old woman the chance to answer proper. That same family Tholey ran off, came up the dark side of my shed at dusk, because a family run out of one door does not come boldly through the next. I was banking my coals when I heard them, the dry squall of an ungreased axle and the blow of 2 worn-out horses, and under it, thin and wrung out to nothing, the coughing of a small child. The kind that has gone on so long it forgets there was ever another way to breathe. I went out with my lamp turned low, and there they were, a high-patched wagon with 1 wheel wound round with wire, a man and a woman on the seat, and behind them the shapes of children and an old woman under a tarp, gone stiff with ice. The man did not get down. It was the woman who spoke, and her voice had the careful level evenness of somebody carrying a brimful bucket she has made up her mind not to spill. "Ma'am," she said, "we don't mean to trouble you. We were told there might be a forge here at the Gap, where a body could take iron without begging for it, and we'd not have come for ourselves. But we've a little one that has not been warm nor eaten today, and I have run clean out of pride to stand on. And I will tell you exactly what went through me, because it is the hinge of the whole thing. It was not pity. Pity is a coin you toss down to somebody you have already set below you. What went through me was a frozen grade 50 years gone, and a girl kneeling at a stranger's fire with a shoeing knife, and a 3-year-old boy who did not live to see the thaw, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I felt. "There is a forge," I said, "but not for the nail tonight. You've a sick child and 2 deadbeat horses, and the dark coming on hard, and you are not taking iron off my chain and driving on into that. Turn your team up the yard. There's a lean-to for the horses and a warm hearth and a table with room at it, and you'll sleep under my roof tonight. I'll hear no argument in this weather." The man turned his face to his wife, and something passed between them without a word, the way it does between married people who have been poor together a long time. Then she said, "Lo, we can't pay you, ma'am." "I know it," I said. "I didn't ask you." Their name was Coyle, road people of an old and honorable trade, for they were farriers and roadsmiths, 4 generations of them who shod teams and mended wagon iron up and down the freight roads, and had run clean out of iron to mend in a year when every failing town sold off its teams and let its freight go quiet to save the wage. The man was Eben Coyle, near 40, quiet, broad through the back, with the biggest and most careful hands I ever saw on a living man, and he did not spend 3 words where a nod would carry the freight. His wife was Marin, the one who had spoken, worn thin the way that year had worn a great many good women, with a level face and a way of looking at a thing dead on. There was a boy near grown named Asa, who had the horses unhitched and blanketed before anybody thought to ask. A solemn girl of 10 named Della. The old grandmother the road called Gran Reed, straight as a poker under a black shawl, with 2 eyes like chips of Blue Creek ice that priced my whole soul in one look and did not seem too disappointed in the figure. And the little one who had been coughing, a boy of about 3 named Bram, hot and heavy against his mother's chest. I got that family into my kitchen and into the good lamplight, and the rest of the ledger read itself off the way it does to anybody who has known a cold house of her own. Their nail keg was empty. That baby was fevered. Those horses were finished, and under their tarp, oiled and wrapped and tended like Scripture, were the tongs and turning forks of a family that built in iron and had run flat out of anything left to build. So I stoked the hearth fried side meat and opened my last jars of pole beans and fed feverfew and honey down that hot little boy a spoon at a time, and stood and watched a cold family thaw. And Big Eben would not sit, but ate standing by the door, and went out after to see the strange horses bedded down warm, for a man of his raising does not rest first. Over supper Marin gave me their names one at a time, and I gave them mine, and that was the whole of what I asked. I did not ask where they were bound, nor what put them on the road in November with a wired wheel and a sick baby, for a family at your table is not a prisoner giving testimony. But Marin told me some of it anyway. Her voice kept flat on purpose. They had come to trade honest work for iron, and the man on the dock had called them beggars in front of the whole road. "I don't tell you for pity, ma'am," she said. "I tell you so you know what manner of folk you have taken under your roof, in case you'd rather think again before morning." "I've thought on it," I said. "Eat your beans." And from the corner by the hearth old Gran Reed let out one dry cackle and said, "She'll do, Marin. Forge keepers is a breed apart." When the children were fed to the eyebrows, I put the family up in my spare room that had been my own children's room a long time ago, before the fever years took them too, and Marin put her flat hand on the door frame the way you lay it on a headstone, and all she said was thank you, but there was a whole winter of weariness let go in the way she said it. Now here comes the part I have told at more firesides than I can count, and I ask you to hear it plain. Before she turned in, Marin came back down to where I was covering the banked coals for the night and squared herself up and said, "Mrs. Kell, I'll say one thing before I sleep, so that it's said and heard and you can never claim you weren't told. Amongst road people, amongst them that shoe and forge and mend their way across this country, iron set out in the dark is a debt. Not the kind you write in a ledger, the kind kept in the marrow. You throw the bar off your door for 50 years and ask nobody their name nor a penny. And then you take a family the whole town called beggars and thaw them out at your own fire and ask them nothing. And that is written now, written where no bad year can rust it and no rich man can buy it back, and it draws its interest quiet, and one day it comes due, and it is paid, every last nail of it. You don't understand what I'm telling you yet. That's all right. Some winter you will." And I told her that a horseshoe was not a debt, it was just neighborliness, and cost me next to nothing I would ever miss. And Marin shook her head once, slow, and said, "It isn't neighborliness, and it isn't nothing. It's iron kept for people you'll never meet, on nights you'll never know about. The road knows exactly what that is, even when the one keeping it does not. That's the whole of what I owe you, ma'am. The saying of it." And from the dark of the stairwell, Gran Reed's cracked voice came drifting down to nobody in particular, and what she said was, "The hanging out is the sewing. The rest comes up in its own hard season." I went to bed in a house that had people breathing in it for the first time in years, and somewhere in the small hours I half heard, or dreamed I heard, a soft patient working down in the shop below me. A scrape and a tap and the low sigh of a bellows worked gentle, and once the ring of a hammer struck soft as a heartbeat, and I thought, let the man be. A proud man's dignity does its business at its own hours, and I slept. In the morning I was down before light, and I stopped dead on the bottom stair with my hand on the rail. My father's hearth, whose firepot had burned through and slumped 6 years back so that the fire ran cool and I could no longer raise a heat hot enough to weld heavy iron, stood rebuilt. The whole failing firepot had been torn out in the night and relaid true, the air pipes scoured and set clean, and my great bellows, that had wheezed through a split seam for 3 winters so I could never raise a proper blast, hung mended with a new cut leather lung, all of it done alone in the dark by feel and 1 candle, better than any smith in the county could set it in a week of daylight. Eben Coyle sat on an upturned keg beside it, with his tools already wrapped. I put my hand flat on the cool new stone of the firepot and had to work my jaw a moment before it would say anything, and said, "That fire has run cold and choked 6 years. I've priced the fix and never once had the money." And Eben stood up, laid one of his enormous, careful hands flat on the hearth, and spent a few of his hoarded words on me. And what he said, low and plain, was, "Good iron under there now. It'll take a weld again." And then he went out to see about the wired wheel, and I stood in the gray light with my hand on a hearth that would carry 3 times the heat it had the day before, and whatever had been sitting on my chest for 50 years shifted its weight and let me breathe under it. They meant to be gone in a day, But the baby's fever hung on, and a 3-day sleet storm sealed the grade to glass, and only a fool drives a sick child onto glare ice to prove a point. Marin said, "Then we work our keep or we go." And she meant it to the bone. So they worked it. And those 2 weeks were the fullest that old shop had been since my own babies were alive in it. Eben mended the wired wheel and then could not seem to stop, re-tiring my sprung cartwheels and re-hanging the sagging shed door and setting a new stone step. And every failing thing about that building quietly turned and started winning its fight. Asa split me 2 winters of forge wood and charred me a good rick of charcoal besides. And it was Gran Reed, from my rocker by the hearth, who told me the thing I have turned over every night since. "Used to be an open forge in every past town in this country," she said. "A smith that threw his bar off after dark so the proud could take iron without kneeling for it. Road people called it a warm door. Wasn't charity, and it wasn't trade, just the old plain manners of a hard country, where a fat year and a lean year trade places quicker than you'd credit, and the man laughing on the dock today is the man at the dark door come spring. Ain't but a few warm doors left now," she said, and she looked at my nail on its chain and then at me, and did not need to say the rest. But the thing Eben did before he left that came to matter more than all the iron he laid, none of us knew yet. Being a roadsmith, he could not help but take the measure of the town's own gear, and he came in quiet one evening off the road and got Marin to say it for him. For he'd not raise an alarm in another man's town in his own voice. "Eben says this winter is going to be a killing one," she told me. "He reads it in how deep the stock are growing their coats and how early. And he says, your town keeps no store of horse iron nor forge coal laid by, that every bar and every scuttle of it comes up by freight, and when a hard freeze glazes this grade and shuts the pass, you'll have a valley full of horses you cannot shoe for the ice and a forge you cannot keep lit. Lay in iron and coal before the deep of winter, more than you think you could ever need, and get your teams sharp-shod early. The toes and heels turn down keen to bite the glaze before the rush comes." I told her the freight had come over that past 40 years without fail, and Marin said, "Eben says nothing comes forever. Things only come until," and I knew, the way you know a true thing you would rather not have heard, that the man was right. So I laid in a little extra coal, and had my own old mare sharp-shod, and carried the warning to the town meeting. And Orentholi stood up in the back of the hall and said that the day he took iron advice off a tramp who slept in Ada Kell's coal shed was the day the anvil floated up river. And the town laughed along with him, and I sat down and said no more. When the sleet let go the grade, the coils loaded to move on. For a family that mends the roads must go where the roads are broken, and I did the one piece of hard business of that whole visit, loading their wagon before they could stop me with a side of meat and 2 sacks of meal, and the 2 best quilts off the spare beds, and a whole keg of my good nails, and when Marin squared up to argue, I got there first. "It's freight," I said, "not charity. You're carrying word up the road for me. Tell it there's still a warm door at the mouth of the pass at Ambrose Gap, same as there ever was, and there always will be." And Marin looked at me a long moment with those level eyes, and something in her face gave way about 1/4 of an inch, which on Marin Coyle was a whole church sermon, and she said, "We'll tell the road, Mrs. Kell." "You believe that we will." And Eben took my hand in his great one and said, "Lo, we'll come back through when you've need of us. Good iron lasts." And then they rolled up the grade in the thin bright cold, the wagon small against the bare rock, and little Bram, mending now and cross with it, waved a fat hand off the tailboard until the road bent and took them out of my sight. Word travels the roads faster than the mail ever learned to, And all that next summer my nail kept feeding the pass. But now they came knowing my name, and gifts took to appearing in my yard of a morning. A dressed hog, a little iron weathercock some roadsmith had cut and left on my step. And buying coal that August, I heard Thole tell a loafer, loud enough for me to take it, that the old woman at the mouth of the pass ran a poorhouse for tramps now. And he gave me the bottom half of his smile and said, "Mind your corner, Ada, for when this soft year turns hard, sentiment don't burn in a forge, and we'll see then who warms who." And then came the winter this whole story is named for, and I'll tell the heart of it straight and quick, for I lived it slow, and once through was a great plenty. The cold set in the first week of January, and did not quit for a month, storm on storm off the northern flats. And then came the ice, a great silver storm that glazed the whole valley an inch thick, shut the grade to glass, and cut Ambrose Gap off from the world entire. And it was the same thing it had meant on the wrong side of that pass 50 years before. There were horses in that valley, hundreds of them, and full woodlots up every hollow, and grain cribs standing full from a good harvest. But a horse you cannot shoe is not a team, and a team that cannot stand is not a haul. Every road lay under glare ice, and a horse on smooth summer iron on glare ice is just 4 legs waiting to break, and could no more haul a stick of wood down out of the hollows than it could fly, and so the town sat down in the middle of its own full valley, with the fuel and the food both a frozen mile off, and began, slow and disbelieving, and then in real terror, to freeze. Orrin Thole had a whole store of bar iron and smithing coal laid by in his freight barn, and he did the thing such a man does when the hard winter he has been predicting finally comes, which is that he did not lend it and he did not give it. He priced it. He set his coal at $1, and then 2, and then 3 the scuttle when a scuttle had been 40 cents in the fall, and his bar iron to match. And the families with a little money paid it, weeping, and the families with none stood in the iced road and watched their wood piles shrink to nothing. And it was the wrong side of the pass all over again. A whole town freezing in the middle of plenty. Only this time it was not pride that did it. It was one cold man's arithmetic. My own forge, stocked a little extra on Eben's warning, held out longer than most, and I shod every horse that could be led to me day and night, and hung not 1 set but 12 on the nail in the dark, and then 24, and watched my little coal pile sink, and it came out that in about 9 more days I too would be scraping a cold hearth, with a whole freezing town at my door. And I'll be honest with you now, for you've listened this long and earned it. On about the 6th night I sat down on the cold stone step of my dark shop with a dead shoe in my lap and the last of the coal dust black on my hands, and I said out loud, to old Ballard and to my brother Wren 40 years frozen in the ground, what good is a warm door now? What good is a lifetime of iron in the dark, when the cold comes for the whole town at once, and I have not a fistful of coal left to answer it with? And that is exactly the night I heard them. Away down the frozen grade, faint at first and steady and coming on. Not the wind. Wheels, the crack and grind of iron tires biting through glaze ice, and the blow of straining teams, and men's voices low and even calling the horses on up through the dark, and I hobbled to my window and scrubbed the frost off the glass with my fist, and I saw them come. A whole slow line of wagons breaking up the iced grade in the black of the January night, lantern after lantern swinging from the bows, and I counted them the way a girl counts the first stars, and I lost my count and started it twice. And the number I came to both times was more than 30. More than 30 wagons, grinding up a sealed pass in the dead of the worst freeze in living memory, straight for my dark shop. And at the head of them, breaking trail with a lantern held high, was Eben Coyle, and beside him Marin, and behind her Asa grown near a man, and in the wagon bed wrapped in every quilt they owned and riding like a queen was old Gran Reed, and Bram, not so little now, standing against his grandmother's knees. And every horse in that line was sharp-shod to bite the ice, and every wagon behind was loaded. Bar iron and kegs of nails and whole ricks of charcoal and coal, and lashed to the biggest of them were the anvils and firepots and bellows of a half-dozen field forges. Because word had gone up and down the road in December that the winter was going to be a killer, and the warm door at Ambrose Gap was about to go cold, and every roadsmith family that had ever lifted a latch in the dark and taken iron off a stranger's nail in that whole country had turned their teams for the Gap, some of them from 2 valleys over, to pay a debt only they had ever been keeping the books on. "Told you it was written down, Mrs. Kell," said Marin, and her level face was wet, and she let it be. And what happened over the next days I could tell you for a week, so I'll give it to you in one breath the way it came. By first light my yard was a work yard. The Coyles and their kin set 6 field forges roaring down the length of my lot, and they did not stop at shoeing. For a roadsmith cannot leave a valley crippled any more than I can leave a cold child at a bare nail, and inside of 4 days they had sharp shod near every horse in the country, so that all those useless teams turned back into haulers, and the wood and the grain began to come down out of the hollows, and they forged besides every winter tool the town had gone without, and would not let me stand alone at my own hearth. So Marin and Della and a dozen roadwomen I had never laid eyes on worked that forge around the clock in shifts with me. And no soul in Ambrose Gap went to bed cold or hungry from the 4th night of that freeze to the first day of the thaw. Money or none, and not a one was ever made to ask, because the road people carried the sharp iron out to every dark stable in the night and hung it on the nail and never knocked and never looked, which was the only way any of them knew how to give it. And up on the corner Orrin Tholey had wanted for his freight depot, those road families did one thing more. In the last 3 days of the freeze, they quarried stone from the old dead toll house and raised me a smithy, a long stone smithy with a double hearth twice the size of my old one, thick-walled and true, with a broad iron shelf and a warm door the whole length of the street front, high and open where the whole town could see it, built to stand 100 years of any winter the flats could throw down the pass. And over the door, cut into the stone lintel in Eben Coyle's own square, careful hand, they set my name, Ada Kell, and under it, smaller, 4 words. The fire asks nothing, and on the last evening they lit the great new hearths, and the warm light and the smell of hot iron rolled out over the whole iced-in town from that open door, and every soul that could still walk had come up to the corner to see it. And when the first sharp shoes and the first armloads of winter iron went out warm along that long stone shelf into the dark, not one of us said a word, and grown men took off their hats. Orrin Tholey had come up the iced road on the 2nd day of it, on foot, having left his fine cutter foundered in the drifts. And on that last evening he came through the crowd to me with his hat in his 2 hands, and said it plain, where the whole town could hear him. "I called these people beggars off my loading dock, Ada," he said, and I laughed doing it, and I stood in my freight barn this winter, and priced coal by the scuttle to people I have known my whole life, while their children froze in the dark. And I've watched these same beggars sharp shoe a whole valley off the ice, and raise you a stone smithy on the corner I coveted, and warm the whole town off a nail in the dark. For the price of one supper and a warm bed you gave them 2 winters back. I was wrong. About them, and about her, and about what a horseshoe hung in the dark is worth, and I've come up here on foot to say it where they can hear me, because I said the other thing where they could hear that too. And then Gran Reed, from her chair by the new hearth, fixed him with those 2 chips of blue ice and said, "The door was open to you too, this whole winter, Orentholi. It never once asked your name either." And the hard old man put his hand over his eyes in front of the whole town, and that was the end of the man he had been. I'll tell you the sum of it and let you go, for it's coming on dark. Sol opened his freight barn the next morning and gave back every dollar he had gouged, down to the penny, and paid the road families a fair wage to finish the town's winter iron true, and the freight depot he had wanted on my corner he never built. And I'm told he takes his supper in the road camp now more nights than not, and says his thank you, like a man who learned the word late. The Coils winter over in Ambrose Gap these days, in a snug stone house, Eben raised 2 doors down, and Eben keeps every team on the pass sharp and sound, and Bram, not little anymore, calls me Gran Ada, and I quit correcting him long ago. And last fall Marin had a new baby, a boy, and without asking my leave they named him Wren Ballard, after the brother I lost on the grade and the old smith who left his door open, and I did not get one whole sensible word said the entire day I heard of it. And the smithy stands on the corner with my name and its 4 cut words over the door, and every night I climb to it and work my iron, and the last thing I do before I bank the coals is throw the bar off the door and hang the shoes out along that long open shelf in the dark. And I do not look, and I do not count. The road up and down the pass has a name for that shelf now. They call it the Ambrose Door, and when a year turns hard, every soul on the road knows there is one corner of one town where the fire is always lit and the iron is always on the nail, and nobody is ever made to ask. So here is the whole of what an old smith knows, learned late and handed to you across a stove at dusk, whoever you are out there in the dark listening. The iron you sell is spent by spring, but the iron you give away in the dark shoes you the rest of your life. You do not hang a shoe on a nail to be repaid. You hang it out because somewhere close by there is a proud family freezing on the wrong side of a grade in a country full of fire, too ashamed to knock. And you have a hearth and a keg of nails and no good reason on this earth to let a child grow cold for the want of iron a hand can lift in the dark. But nothing set out in kindness on an open nail is ever truly lost. The road carries it, and the road forgets nothing it has carried. And some ice-locked winter, when you are sitting alone on a cold step with the last of the coal dust on your hands and no more good reason left to hope, the same hard road you warmed will come grinding up the glaze to your door. 30 wagons strong and 6 forges on the biggest of them, with your name already cut in the stone. So let me leave you with the only question worth carrying home from this fire. When your own hard winter comes, and it will you be the man in the warm barn counting the iron you are owed by the bar and pricing the cold by the scuttle? Or will you be a banked fire behind an unbarred door that never once asks a soul its name? You have both of them in you tonight. I have met the both of them in myself. Only one of them will still have a warm hearth on the far side of February. It's dark now, and my knee tells me weather, and I have iron to hang out. But you come back and sit by this fire again, and if you have ever lifted a latch you could not pay for, or left one open for somebody who could not, you tell me about it, for I'll be here, and the forge will be lit, and away down the iced grade in the gathering blue, a lantern is already climbing toward the corner where the fire is warm, and it always will be.